Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm Margaret Brennan. Former CIA Director and Defense Secretary Robert Gates served 8 presidents, working on nearly every national security issue that America faces. When we spoke at William and Mary Friday, I asked Gates whether he thought North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was really serious about dismantling the country's nuclear program.
I think he's serious about this. I think he sees an opportunity, as do we. I think the president's tough talk and the willingness of the Chinese and the Russians to agree to the toughest sanctions we've ever really applied to North Korea certainly increased the pressure on the North Koreans to come to the table. But I think he also feels that he's at a point with his nuclear program and his ballistic missile program that he can, at least for some period of time, go without testing and test the U.S. administration and see what might happen. I think it's very complicated. They have a nuclear enterprise that is dramatically larger than Iran's. Miles and miles of tunnels, multiple sites, existing nuclear weapons. So getting to genuine denuclearization will be a very complicated process.
You've raised concerns in the past about President Trump's unpredictability as a leader, but do you see that unpredictability as an asset in this case?
I think that the unpredictability in terms of some of the tweets and some of the tough talk did get the attention of the North Koreans and the Chinese as well in terms of fire and fury and so on. My view is generally that tactical unpredictability is good and is an asset. Strategic unpredictability is probably not a good idea for a great power.
Where would you put the president's unpredictability, tactical or strategic?
Well, I think that's not clear yet.
What is he actually able to offer as some kind of incentive for Kim Jong-un to negotiate away his weapons?
Actually, I think the president goes in with a lot of cards to play. A peace treaty, diplomatic recognition, a guarantee that the United States would not try and overthrow the regime by force, the whole panoply of economic sanctions that have been put on. So he has a lot to negotiate with.
If the president gets something in hand from the North Koreans, do you think he has to go to Congress to get approval of it?
I think he should. If you just do these things by executive agreement, first of all, that doesn't make it the law of the land for the next president. The next president, with the stroke of a pen, can overturn it, just as President Trump has done with the Iran deal.
That would need to include inspectors on the ground in North Korea. That would need to include Kim Jong-un actually dismantling some of his nuclear program. I mean, is the benchmark here at least what was negotiated in the Iran deal, and the president has to go beyond that?
Well, it's at least that. When you have a program as expansive as the North's, you have to have anytime, any place inspections. You have to have a huge number of inspectors that can go around the country and can observe destruction of facilities, who can monitor that they stay destroyed, that they aren't being rebuilt someplace else in secret. So the magnitude of the monitoring and the verification of any agreement would be, I think, an order of magnitude more complicated and bigger than is the case and has been the case in Iran.
What do you put the odds of success at?
I put the odds of immediate success as very low. But the odds of getting something accomplished over a longer period of time in a kind of step-by-step approach, beginning with what the president has already gotten in terms of their willingness to talk and the cessation of the testing and so on. Kim looks at the world and he sees that Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program, he's dead, his regime is gone. Saddam never had nuclear weapons, he's dead, his regime is gone. Kim looks at this and says, why would I give up my nuclear weapons? And so I think you have to change the strategic environment in Asia for Kim actually to be willing to consider giving up his nuclear weapons.
What is the immediate impact of exiting the Iran nuclear deal?
Well, I think in the short term, it isolates the United States. I think it was a flawed agreement. We were supposed to get anytime, any place inspections. And to have an inspections regime where the Iranians can say, you can't look at any of our military facilities, where would you most logically put a nuclear program except on a military facility?
But do you think President Trump breaking a U.S. commitment to this international agreement will have implications that are negative?
I do. I absolutely do. My own view would have been it would have been better to stay in the agreement at least for another 6 months and essentially lay down an ultimatum to our allies and say either you join us in very heavy penalties against the Iranians for the ballistic missile programs, and you join us in resisting Iranian meddling in the Middle East. Either you help us with those things, or in fact, I will walk away from this agreement. I think we could have pushed the Europeans a lot harder to work with us. And then in 6 months, basically, if they hadn't done that, then you would be in a much stronger position. But as it is now, at least for the time being, we're the country that's isolated.
You had privately cautioned against the appointment of John Bolton. Now he is within the administration. What are your concerns about the advice he's giving the president?
Well, I think that there's a difference between being a television commentator and having responsibilities of office. And I've seen this happen a lot. One thing that has struck me is that the process at the NSC seems to be working better in terms of documentation of things, of positions being taken. He's clearly got a strong relationship with both, has developed a strong relationship with Secretary Mattis and obviously with Secretary Pompeo. So I think in that sense the president is probably better served because there's less infighting, if you will, within the administration.
You were at the CIA for 26 years. Do you agree with Senator John McCain that Gina Haspel is a patriot, but that a refusal to acknowledge torture's immorality is disqualifying for her to be the director of the CIA?
No, I don't think it's disqualifying. I think that I worry about presentism. I think you have to go back to 2001, 2002, and the horror that people in the administration felt. People were terrified about when the next attack was coming. And only with the retrospect of 17 years of no foreign-based major attack taking place again can we go back and revisit these things. I don't know Ms. Haspel, but by all accounts, she's had an extraordinary career, a very distinguished career, has really served her country well. And I think to say she should not be director of CIA today, in the absence of any evidence she did anything wrong 15 or so years ago, I think is a mistake.
How do you assess President Trump at this point of his presidency?
I think the jury is still out, so to speak.
But you've moved away from your initial criticism of him in 2016.
I'm concerned about the way he's treated our allies. By the same token, I think that his tougher approach to North Korea has paid dividends. We'll see how many dividends they pay over how long a time. I think that his tough talk with the Europeans has accomplished something that all of the rest of us who berated them for not spending enough on defense, they are beginning to increase defense spending. So it's not an entirely one-sided picture in my view.
Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
The full interview will be on our website at facethenation.com, and we'll be back in a moment with our panel. Now to our panel for some political analysis. Dan Balls is the chief correspondent for the Washington Post. We'd like to welcome Selena Zito to the broadcast. She's a national political reporter for the Washington Examiner and the author of The Great Revolt, Inside the Populist Coalition Reshaping American Politics. Jeffrey Goldberg's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and we'd also like to welcome Sungmin Kim to this broadcast. She's a reporter for the Washington Post who covers the White House from Capitol Hill. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let's start with you then. You heard Bob Gates say that Gina Haspel shouldn't be disqualified for any past relationship with the torture program that the U.S. undertook or enhanced interrogation techniques. Does she have the votes to get confirmed?
I think right now things are looking very good for Gina Haspel. Over the weekend, we saw another red state Democrat, Joe Donnelly from Indiana, say he would support her. So looking at the numbers right now, I think the one question mark we have about a potential Republican defection is perhaps Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, who told us on Capitol Hill over the last week that he's very thinking deliberatively about what Senator McCain said about Haspel's nomination last week. But aside from that, you have at least 2 Democrats who are supporting her. So her prospects on Capitol Hill look very good right now.
And that comment from John McCain basically saying there shouldn't be any kind of question that discounts the morality of torture here, that any connection is too much to vote yes.
Exactly. And I think what's interesting is you see the absence of Senator McCain felt in so many ways on Capitol Hill. But since he's the Senate Armed Services Committee chairman, he actually would have been able to question Gina Haspel at her hearing as what we call an ex officio member of the committee. So while his statement was very strong, it would have been interesting to see how Ms. Haspel would have fared under questioning from Senator McCain.
Jeff, I want to ask you, we heard from the new Secretary of State at the start of the program, Mike Pompeo. Did it surprise you when he said he doesn't know whether he'll be involved with these talks with Kim Jong-un?
Yes, but it's surprising and unsurprising because this is a spontaneous administration. This is an improvisational administration. We are entering a period of maximum risk, maximum opportunity as well, both in North Korea and Iran. But you intensify the risk when you don't even tell us who is going to be negotiating with the North Koreans. The idea that Donald Trump alone in a room with the North Korean dictator is it's a fraught idea because you don't know what he's going to do, and we don't have a sense of how far he wants to go. So it would be interesting and useful to have the Secretary of State who actually knows the North Korean leadership to be involved in that. And it was a little bit surprising that he said that, to be honest.
He might not want to get ahead of his boss, but he certainly has the most developed relationship.
I personally would bring the Secretary of State with me, but that's just me.
When you negotiate with
whenever I negotiate with the North Koreans, I'm always bringing I'll bring Dan Bald, actually. Yeah, I'm bringing Dan Bald.
You're better off bringing a Secretary of State.
All right.
Dan and Selena, I want to get to you both because talking about the president and his behavior and what makes him uniquely him, you've studied a lot about that, including the people who really stand by their votes for him. And you had a piece this week looking at the heart of this country and the people still standing by President Trump. Do you believe here that going into November, that coalition that helped elect him will re-elect a Republican majority?
I'm not confident of that at this point for 2 reasons. One is I think there has been some erosion in the intensity of support among some of the people who backed him in 2016. And it's not that they have broken with him, but they are nervous about him, and particularly about conduct and behavior, much more than specific policies. So I think that's one aspect of it. The other is, as President Obama showed, it is very difficult for somebody who gets elected president to transfer that coalition that backed that person to other candidates who don't have the same kind of connection with voters. Candidates have to develop that connection themselves, and in a midterm election like this, the Democrats have an advantage. It's the first midterm after a president gets elected. That's always better for the out party. So for all of those reasons, I'm not confident that the president can deliver his coalition in November.
But you said in your piece, the people didn't change, the Democrats did. That's what one person you interviewed told you.
Well, that's right. I ended up talking more to Republicans and people who had supported Trump. But in talking to some of the Democrats in the Midwest, I think there's a feeling that the National Democratic Party doesn't understand the Midwest in the same way that a lot of the Trump voters felt that they didn't understand the Midwest. And their view is the Democrats have to figure out a way to be able to talk to the center of the country while continuing to hold the coasts. And if they can do that, then they will be genuinely competitive in 2020.
And Selena, that's a question you're asking in your book. I mean, is that even possible?
Well, and one of the things about this coalition is that Donald Trump wasn't the cause of it. He was the result of it. So this coalition, I believe, is willing to continue to break things even outside the ballot box. I'm unsure what's going to happen in the midterms, but I do understand that it is still pretty strong and it's pretty intense. And they still believe that both political parties, not just the Democrats, but the Republicans as well, aren't listening to what they have to say. And I find that fascinating that this movement is going on, but we're still not hearing it. And so that's
not hearing it. You're saying on Capitol Hill, not hearing it.
not hearing it in the way it's depicted when typically when there's news reports and they talk about, you know, well, the Trump voter is this and or that, and this is what they want. Case in point, look at the Republicans in West Virginia. They were convinced that Don Blankenship had a chance. Well, I have been to West Virginia. It's in my backyard. I live in Pittsburgh. Don Blankenship had zero chance, absolutely none. But both the Republican establishment and a lot of the news media thought this was something that was going to happen. So they still don't understand what is causing this coalition to stay together, but also to have their voice be heard in the ballot box.
We want to talk about this more on the other side of this break. So we will be back in a moment with more from our panel. And we are back with our panel here. Let's pick up the conversation with you, Sunmin Kim. I want to ask you, this report out of the White House this week that the Homeland Security Secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, was just lambasted in a meeting with the president, so much so that she actually drafted a letter of resignation for the moment they say she is staying. What was the feedback like on Capitol Hill? I mean, at this point, there are a number of people who've been reshuffled in this cabinet. Can you get a Homeland Security Secretary confirmed?
I think members of the Senate, particularly Senate Republicans, are just exhausted with the constant cabinet drama that we've seen, especially that has picked up this year. First of all, just on the simple fact that you have to confirm all these replacements once they're ousted, and a lot of these are very difficult tasks in a midterm year. In terms of the Homeland Security Secretary, it's usually a tough battle because it deals with the issue of immigration, which is always a sensitive issue on Capitol Hill. It would be interesting to see. Secretary Nielsen is actually scheduled to testify on Capitol Hill this week on Tuesday as part of a regular oversight hearing on national security, border security issues. I'm confident that this issue will arise and that they will be questioning, you know, what are the concerns that the president outlined in this meeting? Did you actually threaten to resign? And it'll be interesting to see how she responds under oath.
Well, what's fascinating about this moment is if you want to look at Donald Trump, people think of him as inconsistent, but there's a remarkable consistency here. What triggered him in this case was fear that she was not applying herself rigorously to the issue of immigration. This is the week that he withdrew from the Iran deal, like he said he would. This is the deal that he's moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, like he said he would. Immigration, he comes back to it again and again and again. I mean, it's not that hard to predict what gets him going and what triggers him. And it's a pretty interesting guide this week to what's going to come, because he comes back to the same issues and promises over and over again.
But Republicans bet they could move him away from those platforms.
I would not bet with those Republicans.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Well, Sunmin Kim, though, I want to ask you again, I mean, on this idea of the president being able to deliver on his campaign promises, but being at odds with Congress, he also tweeted yesterday that the Senate needs to stay in session, not go away for August recess. What are the odds of that happening?
Well, I will say that last year, Mitch McConnell did delay the Senate recess for 2 weeks. He actually cut that delay by a week, so it actually ended up being a week. But I think there is a sense of frustration that Republicans are sensing from their voters that they aren't getting things done. So to the extent that they can show that they are in Washington, that they are passing pieces of Trump's agenda, they are confirming his nominees that have been backlogged in the Senate, that could be a benefit. But at the same time, there are people who want to go back home and campaign. Nobody wants to be in D.C. in August. But the fact is, the other complicating factor is that there is a government funding issue that we're going to face every September. And the president made it very clear earlier this year, I'm never signing a massive omnibus spending bill like this again. He very reluctantly signed that $1.3 trillion measure.
Now he's trying to get some of that money back.
He's trying to get some of that money back. He is also insisting that some or more money for the border wall be in whatever package that has to be in September. That is a classic recipe for a shutdown. But you have to say for recess could be a tactic to actually try to get that funding work done ahead of time. But We know this Congress, they never do anything without a deadline.
Selena, you said the media is not picking up on what the coalition is saying. Is the president tapping into what the coalition is saying?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at some of the things that he's given back to them, at least from their point of view. I look at the tax reform bill. A lot of people, you know, in Washington, especially among the Democrats, the sort of storyline was it's just crumbs. But people, you know, outside of the Beltway, you know, an extra $100 in your paycheck every 2 weeks, that pays for stuff. You know, at the end of 4 or 5 months, that's a nice vacation with your family. So, you know, tax reform is very important to them, and in terms of religious freedom, and you know, with Gorsuch, that was also incredibly important to them. How he's negotiated and got to the point where he is with North Korea, absolutely. You know, they're happy with what he has accomplished. Now, to Dan's point, he's absolutely right. They don't always like his comportment. They don't always like the way he says things, but they're seeing results, and they see it impacting their lives and their communities and their families, and they think that is a good thing.
Dan, Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York, gave a commencement speech yesterday where he said the country is facing an epidemic of dishonesty, and he called it one of the most serious dangers facing our democracy.
Well,
you've written a bit about truth.
I have written a bit about that. I mean, we're in a moment, I mean, others have defined it this way, in a post-truth era in which we can't agree on facts, and we have a president of the United States who deals in falsehoods. We've seen that over and over again. And I think that it has created a corrosive effect, both on the on the democratic process, but also on the relationships among people who are in other ways looking for ways in which we can solve some problems. So it's the environment that has been created, and Donald Trump's not the sole reason for this. The environment that we're in, and it has been created, has left us at a point where we can't get things done. And instead, we're at war with one another, and we are dismissive of people who have attitudes and views that are different from our own.
Fascinating conversation, interesting reads from both of you. Thanks for joining us. We will be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Before we go, we want to express our gratitude to the many people who have been working night and day to get this studio and all the infrastructure required to run in place. So to our Washington Bureau technical staff and all the people behind the scenes, we really appreciate all that you've done, all that you do every week and every day to get Face the Nation on the air. And to my mom, my mother-in-law, and all the mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.